It's the Self-Defense Report podcast with Jim Bunker and Phil Elmore.
Hi, and welcome to the Self-Defense Report podcast. I'm Jim Bunker along with
Phil Elmore.
Hey, so folks, tonight, one of the things we wanted to talk about is one of the things that just unfortunately rears its ugly head way too many times, and that's that there are certain people in this world that want to do massive shootings, massive killings, bombings, explosives, things along those lines. We've recently had another massive killing in Sri Lanka where a bunch of people were killed. I'm right about that, right? Is it Sri Lanka?
I think instead of the term people, the words you're looking for are Easter worshipers, because we wouldn't want to identify them as Christians and highlight the fact that Christians are persecuted and murdered the world over because they are not a sanctioned victim group, according to our media.
Yeah.
So many hundreds of Easter worshipers were prematurely shown the door from existence. Is how we would put that.
You know, and our local news here in Wisconsin made mention of the fact that there was some young man that had traveled to that area of the world who was just visiting, and he had just flown in, and his mom was sure that he wouldn't be in that situation. And turns out he was going to breakfast that morning and was right there when it all happened and did not make it. So obviously there's groups of people across the world, and, you know, we can't put a name on those people other than horrible terrorists, bad people, mass shooters, active shooters, whatever you want to call it. But
we can. We'll just get kicked off YouTube if we do, because what we wouldn't want to acknowledge reality, would we?
Well, just keep in mind, I mean, you know, there's crazy people the world abound. Timothy McVeigh would be a great example of, homegrown terrorists that we had that made, tons of damage in Oklahoma City years ago and killed a lot of people. So one of the things you have to be thinking about, folks, is threat analysis. And that's something I've done a lot in my career, and I continue to do. We've got one of the largest publicized movies in probably the last 5 years coming out this week, this Thursday, and that's Avengers Endgame. And I would tell you that A, I'm not going opening night, B, I'm not going to a large theater, and C, for threat analysis, I'm looking at an area where it's a smaller crowd. Why? Because when these bad guys want to kill people, they want to kill lots of people at the same time. And if you go to a movie theater that sits 250 people, it's a plex, huge screen, you might think about doing that in a week or so. Because if you remember the last mass shooting in a movie theater, that was because The Dark Knight Rises was coming to theaters. And that movie was highly publicized, and Batman was very popular at that time. And I would not doubt that there's a chance of a copycat shooter doing something like that.
If I remember correctly, people in that theater thought he was like some kind of part of the movie somehow. They thought that it was some kind of immersive theater experience. They didn't realize that this was a heavily armed lunatic come to shoot up the theater. I'm doing this from memory. I haven't read an article about that particular shooting in a long time, but if I remember correctly, he had all kinds of explosive booby traps set up at home. He'd been planning the attack for quite some time. In this case, he was not a politically motivated terrorist so much as he was just one of those incredibly insane people who, for whatever reason, there's that line from the movie Cobra, just some a-hole woke up hating the world. Who knows what his particular motivation was. But I remember there was a lot of talk about the fact that the movie theater where the shooting took place was one of those places where you're not allowed to have a handgun. The premises are posted as you can't bring a handgun in here. And of course, gun owners across the country, when confronted with those signs, a lot of them were just like, sure, that's the second time I'm doing my stage wink in this episode. But, we, as concealed carry holders, you've all done it. You have. You've seen the sign that says you can't bring a gun in here, and you think to yourself, well, what they don't know won't hurt me. But the fact is, a lot of people said, well, if they'd been allowed to carry guns in that theater, that shooting wouldn't have happened. But that raises the very thorny issue of Really? Would you really have been able to take a shot in the middle of a darkened movie theater with people running around and screaming? And I want to say he was setting off like smoke bombs, and I may be misremembering that, but you've got this chaotic scene. You're on an inclined a slope. You've got seats everywhere. You got people everywhere. People are screaming. It's dark. Okay, take the shot. Where are you shooting? Who are you shooting? How many people are in the way? Are you sure you can do it? Like, there's a lot of factors, and I don't think people consider. I'm
That's
not one of
true.
these people who says that self-defense is futile. I'm just saying that these types of self-defense shootings don't happen in a vacuum. It's not as easy as, well, if somebody had had a gun, they could have taken him down. Not necessarily.
Yeah, that's true. But how many situations have we seen where any active shooter meets any resistance and they off themselves?
Well,
You don't
that's
have
true.
to. You don't have to be accurate. You have to be getting rounds downrange in his direction to get him to exit the door he just came in, while not shooting, other citizens and innocent individuals. So
I,
I always carry my kit to include at least one good sized flashlight where I can control an environment like that. If you fly, if you go to the movie theater, if you're out in public and you've got a good sized, aluminum cased flashlight with, some kind of crenulated bezel, and all I'm talking about are the sculpted ends that you can hit somebody with, that's a fantastic weapon in itself. There's actually a book written about that by a gentleman I know, all about flashlight self-defense by Phil Elmore. But my point to you is not to pitch Phil's book. It's just to tell you, even a small, tiny little crenulated bezel flashlight that you get off of Amazon for literally $4. It doesn't have much of a bezel, but it's got some crenulations on the bezel. That's going to hurt a lot worse than just getting hit with a fist when you drive it into someone's temple. Yeah, exactly.
we're flashlight buddies. I think it's the same
We
way.
are. So what you want to be thinking about is you want to have a plan. I say this all the time, have a plan, but the reality is this weekend is dangerous, folks. So if you're listening to us before Endgame happens, give some real serious thought to your safety and your family. Have a plan. Know where the exit is so you can get out if things start to happen. Okay? One of the best things to do in an active shooter situation is leave the area. So if you are not one of the people that's going to fight back, and you know that, have a plan to run, and have an organized plan to run. If things happened and you went out the back of the theater, would you know how to get around to your car? And is that even a good idea at that time? Do you know that the average active shooter situation will be over within 5 minutes? That's the average. Now, that doesn't mean that he barricades himself in a bathroom and the local police department decides that they're going to start negotiating with an active shooter like they did down in Florida at the Pulse nightclub, and he killed a bunch of other folks. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the average situation. But at Pulse nightclub, there was a former Marine, a gay man, from what I understand, who worked security there, and he literally flung himself at a group of about 80 people that were at an exit, but someone had a hold of the door and was doing what people do when they panic. He was pulling on it, and they were trying to pull the door in. When all exit doors on buildings exit out, you push on the bar. But he couldn't figure it out because people are freaking out. And if you don't have a plan, if you're one of those people, if you've ever been punched in the face and you know what that feels like, that brilliant white light when you get hit in the nose and you have that sudden surge of pain and both eyes, get that brilliant white light. If you don't know how to fight through that, if you haven't made a plan to fight, that's okay. Get the hell out of Dodge. Get out of the way so the cops responding can get there. In Florida, at the airport, when the guy pulled out the gun and started shooting people laid down on the floor. They cowered behind little luggage carts. That's not going to stop a bullet. The luggage cart itself is made of thin steel, but there's nothing there. It's a little thin bar. It's not going to cover you.
Every shooting class I've ever taken has stressed the need for movement, of staying mobile while you're shooting, as a way of not just saving your own life, but taking out the bad guy. I have to think that extends to people who are fleeing a shooter when they're unarmed. Like,
absolutely.
Lying down on the floor and just waiting for him to get around to killing you is not a survival strategy.
And the reality of it is it's 10 feet away from the luggage racks to the exit doors at most airports.
Yeah.
25, 30 feet at the most. Run.
Yeah, you can't shoot everybody, literally.
Get out of there, and maybe don't go to the parking garage in case it's a second level threat where they're going to be blowing up bombs. Maybe go out behind the oak trees and hide until you get the all clear. And there's law enforcement officers everywhere pointing guns at people. That's fine. That's when you got a better chance of survival. Go ahead.
Well, we started out talking about movie theaters. Some of you right now are thinking, "Ooh, if I take my flashlight to the movie theater, I can light up somebody who's being obnoxious in the theater." And I would be lying to you if I said I hadn't done that. However, I would also be lying to you if I said I hadn't considered afterwards the fact that I was escalating a situation that could have turned into a fight. And the reason I know that is I saw a guy get his butt handed to him in a movie theater once by some black lady who was talking loudly during the film. So this middle-aged white guy decides he's going to tell the black lady to shut up in no uncertain terms, and he gets up and he goes up. Now, mind you, this was a free preview screening. He didn't pay anything to be in the movie. If there was a problem, he could have left. It's just a movie. They'll give you your money back. All you have to do is complain. They'll hand you your money. You can go to the movie another time if you don't like the conditions in the theater. But instead, this guy decides he's going to play tough guy. And she slapped him full in the face, and then they started wrestling around like a couple of Jerry Springer guests. I know because they were in the row directly behind me. So eventually, she got done beating him up and left. And I know that if she had the presence of mind to just keep going, she totally got away with it, because what's he going to do? How's he going to describe her in time for anyone to intercept her? So I took a very powerful lesson from that day, which was, you could have just moved. And if the theater was so full, you could have moved, you could have left. And he wouldn't even have needed to get his money back because we were all there for free. It was a preview screening where they handed out free tickets. Ironically enough, it was the movie Instinct featuring Anthony Hopkins and Cuba Gooding Jr., which is about man's capacity for violence. So,
well, I'll tell you this, when we go back to talking about active shooters, and you talk about the fact that the gentleman in Aurora, Colorado, that killed all those people at the movie theater was criminally insane, and he's just a piece of work. I want you to think about this, okay? We're going to talk about this a little more in another podcast, but people in emotional states of rage sometimes lose the ability to reason completely. I mean, I've literally seen situations where people have been killed over the last piece of chicken on the plate at a table with someone you're supposed to love, and someone gets stabbed to death. The homicide that I was talking about in a couple episodes back was a homicide of passion and rage, where a woman stabbed a man through his heart with a boning fillet knife from their knife set. And then, attempted to hurt herself and kill herself with a blade while I was there. So crimes of passion and lacking any thought of reality of what's going to happen. Road rage is a prime example of that. Situations where people are upset. I remember years ago, I walked in, and I'm a police officer at the time, and I was just in a horrible day. I had sour mood, and I had one of my sons, I was walking into a Home Depot, and there was a Hispanic guy coming out, and he literally was spoiling for a fight. I could just see it on his face, and he saw this sour look on my face. He looks at me, he goes, "You got a problem, man?" And I looked at him and said, "No, not at all," and just kept going. Every ounce of me was upset, and knew that in an instance I could blow up and get into it with someone. But there's absolutely no way to win that fight.
Nothing to be gained.
There's nothing to be gained, and there's no way to win that fight in any situation like that. The best thing to do is to realize that you are the only one that's in control, and the only thing you have control over is you. And if you don't get in the fight, you won. Go back to, I know it's kind of a corny reference, but go back to Patrick Swayze's conversation he has with his bouncers in Roadhouse. When one of the guys says, "Well, what if he calls my mama a whore?" Well, is she? And the reality is, they're just words. They're words that are put together to elicit an emotional response. And if someone cuts you off in traffic, let it go.
I had an experience just like that the other day. It was dark, and I was pulling into a driveway, and I looked up in my mirror, and I thought, was that a guy? So I look out the door, and there's a guy on a skateboard, not a kid either, like a grown man, almost my age. And he's rolling down towards the end of the block. He's almost at the stop sign. And I'm like, oh my God, I almost ran him over. I didn't see him. It was dark and I didn't see him. He was wearing dark clothes. There was nothing to see. So I opened my door and I called, I'm so sorry. I did not see you. Are you okay? He stops. He turns around. He says, did you say something to me? So I turn off my car and I say, yes, I was apologizing because I didn't see you. And he goes, oh. So I walk over and shake his hand. He's like, I do so much skateboarding, man. Sometimes I just lose my mind. I'm like, I'm sorry. I did not see you. I wasn't trying to run you down. He's like, yeah, it's okay. So he leaves. And all I could think was, you stupid idiot. You almost got us both into a fight over nothing. And fortunately, I was more upset that I almost ran someone over. I was not responding to the bait of some guy trying to start a fight over nothing. But if I had responded with, yeah, I got something to say to you, that could easily have become a fight over nothing. And nobody wins that. We both end up losing because somebody gets hurt or somebody gets arrested or both of us get hurt and arrested, and it was just so stupid. It's like, for one thing, okay, mister, you're 40 years old, you're wearing fingerless leather gloves and you're skateboarding down the street in the middle of the night. I don't know what's got you following this life path, but maybe some different decisions are in order. Don't go around skateboarding in the dead of night wearing all black, picking fights with strangers, I guess, is what I would say.
Well, and the reality with that, Phil, in my opinion, from what I've seen over the years, is that, there's a million different people and a million different ways of thinking. Some you never know what kind of situation someone's going through. That's why I highly recommend that, you're extremely cognizant and aware that you have no idea the capacity for violence that's around you. I studied underneath the detective that interviewed Jeffrey Dahmer. And he interviewed Jeffrey Dahmer for his case and basically got a ton of confessions from Jeff. And at the end of their interviews, this detective told us, this entire class of officers that was studying with him, that Jeff literally said to him, okay, man, we'll take care. And hey, be careful out there. There's some real weirdos out there. Words from Jeff Dahmer.
I think it's one of the great ironies. Well, it's not really ironic at all. He begged to be let into the general population. He was being kept in isolation for his own well-being. The second they let him out, I don't even know if it was a matter of days, he was immediately murdered because the people in prison were like, oh, hell no. They just killed him outright.
Well, he also did a lot to make that happen. He was acting really strange to the other prisoners and causing problems, intimidating some of them about the fact that he ate body parts. And a little quip about that is supposedly, and this may be urban legend, I'm not sure, but I know some correctional people that said that it was pretty factual, is that his prisoner account, this is the guy by the name of Carver that killed Jeff Dahmer, his prisoner account had to be turned off because there was so much money coming in. he had over $1 million in his account. And again, I can't confirm that. I don't know that that's not just urban legend.
He's just buying all the ramen noodles.
Well, and supposedly it was coming from families from Milwaukee.
Yeah.
That had lost some loved ones, and it's called, I think it's called a canteen account or something along those lines.
Yeah,
for the prisoner.
Commissary.
Yeah, there it is. There's commissary account. Yeah. So, all right, folks. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode of the Self-Defense Report podcast. But just keep in mind, Endgame this weekend. Give some real serious thought to it. If you are a CCW carrier, I suggest you carry. I suggest you have a plan. I suggest you have a flashlight. I suggest you pick a smaller venue. I suggest you know where your family should go should you have an issue. So, as always, if you see something, say something.
Preferably while you're shooting back.
Thanks. Have a good day. Hi, welcome to the Self-Defense Report podcast. I'm Jim Bunker, and I'm here along with... We can start that over. Yeah, let's.
Well, end credits, blooper secured.
Hey, thanks for joining us for tonight's episode at the Self-Defense Report podcast. I'm Jim Bunker. That.
And I'm what? What do you mean?
And I said, and that is that. And with me tonight is.
I'm not following.
You're not that. I get it. Okay. Take 3.
Check us out online and on audio. Links are in the description.